The air in the royal library smelled of old paper and beeswax, a scent Lily had come to associate with peace. It was a quiet corner of the sprawling stone castle, a world away from the clatter of court politics and the weight of ancient lineage that hung in the grander halls. Here, surrounded by the silent wisdom of 1,000 forgotten authors, she could be herself. Her sketchbook, bound in worn blue leather, lay open on the heavy oak table. The page was a flurry of charcoal lines, the ghost of a sleeve here, the sharp promise of a collar there. This was her true language, the one she spoke not with her tongue, but with her hands. King Edward found her there, as he often did. He moved with a quiet grace that belied the power he wielded, his footsteps softened by the thick Isfahan rug. He was not a king of bombast and decree. His authority was a settled thing, a mantle he wore as naturally as the fine wool of his tunic. He leaned over her shoulder, his warmth a familiar comfort against her back. "More magic, Lily?" he asked, his voice a low murmur that vibrated through the wood of the table. She smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression she reserved for him and her craft. "Just ideas, Edward. Trying to capture the way the light fell on the east-facing stained glass this morning. It was all fractured gold and sapphire. I thought it might make a beautiful pattern for an embroidery." He picked up a finished sketch from a small stack beside her. It depicted a gown of deep emerald velvet, its neckline plunging in a daring but elegant V, the sleeves slit to the elbow and lined with silver silk that would whisper with every movement. It was beautiful, a piece of wearable art. He saw the skill in it, the precision of the lines, the clear vision. "This is lovely," he said, and he meant it. He saw it as he saw her other talents, her skill with a lute, her surprising knowledge of battlefield histories, her ability to coax roses to bloom in the thin mountain soil of the castle gardens. They were all facets of the remarkable human woman who had somehow captured the heart of an elven king. This, however, was different. This was not a pastime, it was a passion. It was the central pillar of her soul, the thing around which all her other thoughts and feelings orbited. Today, she had decided, was the day she would make him see. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird beating its wings against a cage of her own making. For weeks she had been building to this, gathering her courage like a hoard of precious jewels. "Edward," she began, her voice a little tight. She cleared her throat and squared her shoulders, turning on the bench to face him fully. She slid the main sketchbook toward him, its pages filled with dozens of designs, notes on fabric, sketches of stitching techniques, even calculations for material costs. "This is more than just doodling. It's what I want to do. I've been researching suppliers, looking at old guild maps for where the best weavers are. I think I want to open a small atelier in the city, a place to create things for the ladies of the court, perhaps even beyond. I believe I can make it a success." She watched his face, her entire being focused on the subtle shift of his expression. She saw his eyes scan the pages, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was taking it seriously. Hope, bright and painful, bloomed in her chest. He was a good king, a wise ruler. He understood commerce and trade, the value of skilled artisans. He would see the potential. He would see her. He closed the book gently, the soft thud of the leather cover landing on the pages sounding like a gavel in the silent room. He looked at her, and his eyes were full of a deep, gentle affection that was, in that moment, the cruelest thing he could have shown her. "Lily," he said, his smile kind, patient. "These are wonderful, truly. You have a remarkable talent." He reached out and tucked a stray strand of her brown hair behind her ear. "It's a wonderful way to occupy your time." The hope in her chest withered, its petals turning to ash. "Occupy my time?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "Of course," he continued, utterly oblivious to the devastation he was wreaking. "A queen, or a woman who will one day be a queen, needs diversions. It's a demanding life, full of ceremony and expectation. It's good that you have such cute little hobbies to keep your spirits up." Cute little hobbies. The words landed like stones, each one striking a different part of her, shattering the fragile structure of her dreams. It wasn't his dismissal of the business plan that hurt, or the glossing over of her research. It was the condescension, the gentle, loving, soul-crushing condescension. He had looked at the very heart of her, the thing she had painstakingly carved out of her own essence, and he had patted it on the head. She didn't cry. The tears froze somewhere in her throat, a solid lump of ice. She didn't scream or argue or try to explain. What was the point? He had already passed his verdict. Her world of silk and structure, of form and function, was, to him, a dollhouse. With a slow, deliberate movement, she reached out and pulled the sketchbook back to her side of the table. Her fingers traced the worn cover. Then she closed it. The sound was no louder than the first time, but to her, it was the sound of a door being locked, a key being turned, a future being sealed away from him. "You're right," she said, her voice perfectly level, a marvel of control. "They are a good diversion." He smiled, pleased that she understood. "Good. Now, I came to find you because the emissary from the Sunken Isles has arrived. The preliminary trade talks are this afternoon. I would be grateful for your presence." He was talking about matters of state, of ruling, of his world. A world he saw as real and substantive. She nodded, her expression placid. "Of course, my king." The title felt strange on her tongue. Before, it had been a term of endearment, a playful acknowledgement of his station. Now, it was a wall, a boundary. He was the king, and she was the woman with the cute little hobbies. She stood and followed him from the library, leaving the sketchbook on the table like a tombstone for a dream. She never asked for his validation again. She never showed him another sketch. A part of her that had been open to him, a sun-drenched courtyard in her soul, had quietly closed its gates. And in the silence that followed, she began to build. The first few weeks were a study in quiet logistics. Lily had a modest inheritance from her human family, a sum that was negligible to the elven crown, but significant to a woman with a plan. She used it not for jewels or gowns, but to secure a lease on a small, neglected property in the artisans' quarter of the capital city. It was 2 rooms, dusty and smelling of damp stone, with a large north-facing window that was caked in a century of grime. It was perfect. Her days remained a performance of placid, courtly life. She sat beside Edward during tedious trade negotiations, her mind not on tariffs, but on the tensile strength of different silks. She walked with him in the gardens, her gaze not on the roses, but on the way the petals overlapped, inspiring a new design for a layered sleeve. She was present in body, a serene and beautiful fixture at the king's side, but her mind was elsewhere, in a world of chalk marks and shears, of humming machines, and the scent of hot iron on damp linen. Her nights became her own. After the castle had settled into a deep, slumbering silence, she would slip out through a servant's passage, a simple gray cloak hiding her identity. The city at midnight was a different creature, a place of shadows and secrets. Her little shop was one of them. She cleaned it herself, scrubbing the floors until her knees ached, washing the great window until the pale moonlight streamed in, illuminating the swirling dust motes like a galaxy of tiny stars. She hired a single seamstress, an old woman named Ilara, whose hands were gnarled with arthritis, but whose stitches were as fine and even as a line of poetry. Ilara had been dismissed from the royal tailor's workshop for being too slow, too traditional. Lily saw not slowness, but precision. She saw not tradition, but a foundation of masterful technique. Ilara asked no questions about the young noblewoman who paid her in cash and worked beside her until dawn. She simply recognized the fire of a true creator and was content to tend its flame. Together, they transformed the dusty space. They painted the walls a soft cream. They installed shelves for bolts of fabric that Lily sourced through discreet merchants, spending hours in dusty warehouses, her fingers caressing velvets from the south and linens from the western isles. She bought a state-of-the-art sewing machine, a complex marvel of gears and needles from the gnomish city-states, and spent a week just learning its rhythms, its temperamental clicks and whirs. Edward noticed her fatigue. He saw the faint, bruised shadows under her eyes, the new quietness that had settled over her. He attributed it to the rigors of court life, the endless demands on her time and energy. He felt a pang of guilt, believing her to be wilting under the pressure of his world. "You're tired, my love," he said one evening, his hand gently stroking her cheek. "Perhaps you should spend more time with your drawings. They always seem to relax you." She met his gaze, and for a fleeting moment, he saw something in her eyes he couldn't name. Not anger, not sadness, but a kind of profound, weary distance. It was as if she were looking at him from across a vast, unbridgeable chasm. "I'm fine, Edward," she said, her voice soft. "Just a little weary." She gave him a small, polite smile, and the moment passed. He didn't press. He didn't know how. The easy intimacy they had once shared, the effortless way their thoughts and feelings had intertwined, was gone. He felt its absence like a phantom limb, a constant, dull ache he couldn't locate. He just knew something was missing. Meanwhile, in the little shop in the artisans' quarter, a revolution was beginning. Lily did not advertise. She did not seek commissions from the great ladies of the court. She simply made one dress. It was a gown of deep blue wool, so dark it was almost black, tailored with a severe military precision that was offset by a cascade of impossibly delicate silver embroidery that flowed down one shoulder like a frozen waterfall. It was fierce and beautiful, strong and fragile, all at once. She dressed a mannequin and placed it in the clean, bright window of her shop, with a small, elegant card at its feet that read, simply, "Aurelia." It was a name she'd taken from her grandmother, a whisper of her human past. For a week, people just walked by, their curiosity piqued by the sudden transformation of the derelict shop. Then, a minor baroness, a woman known for her adventurous taste and her disdain for the stuffy court fashions, stepped inside. She bought the dress on the spot. 2 nights later, at a soirée hosted by the Minister of Trade, the Baroness wore the Aurelia gown. It was a sensation. In a sea of pastel silks and fussy lace, the crown was a statement. It was elegant, but it had an edge. It spoke of power, of self-possession. Women surrounded the Baroness, their fingers tracing the silver embroidery, their voices a chorus of admiration and inquiry. "Where did you get it? Who is the designer?" The Baroness smiled mysteriously. "A little place in the artisans' quarter. It's called Aurelia." The next day, a dozen women visited the shop. Lily had 2 more gowns ready. They were sold within the hour. The mystique grew. Aurelia was not just a dressmaker. She was an artist. Her pieces were rare, her vision singular. She took no commissions, she simply created, and what she created, the women of the city clamored to possess. She never showed her face, communicating only through Ilara, which only fueled the legend. Who was this mysterious Aurelia, who seemed to understand not just how women wanted to look, but how they wanted to feel? The buzz reached the castle, as all interesting gossip eventually did. Lily heard the ladies-in-waiting whispering about it during their needlepoint sessions. "They say she works only by moonlight. I heard she was a disgraced noblewoman from the summer court, practicing her art in exile. My cousin waited 3 hours just to see if a new piece had been put in the window. It hadn't." Lily would listen, her own needle moving with steady, even stitches, a small, secret smile playing on her lips. She felt a quiet, satisfying hum of power. It was hers. She had made it. It had nothing to do with the king, with his approval or his resources. It was built from her own sleepless nights, her own savings, her own 2 hands. Edward, too, heard the whispers. He was a king. He paid attention to the currents of his city. The name Aurelia was spoken with a kind of reverence he usually associated with master painters or poets. It was a matter of cultural significance, and he was curious. "This designer," he said one evening to his chief advisor, a wizened elf named Valerius. "Aurelia, what do we know of her?" Valerius stroked his long silver beard. "Very little, my king, which is, it seems, the source of her appeal. Her work is transformative. The women who wear her designs carry themselves differently. There is a confidence, an authority to the clothing that seems to be imparted to the wearer. She is not merely following trends. She is creating a new visual language for the modern woman of the court." Edward was intrigued. He had always believed that clothing was a part of statecraft, uniforms for soldiers, regalia for ceremonies, gowns that projected the wealth and stability of his kingdom. He had never considered it an art form capable of imparting confidence. He thought of Lily's sketches, the passion in her eyes when she had described them. A flicker of something uncomfortable, something he refused to name as shame, stirred within him. The announcement of Aurelia's first formal runway show sent a shockwave through the capital's elite. The invitations were the most coveted items in the city. They were delivered by courier, simple cards of thick, cream-colored paper with the name Aurelia embossed in gold. No one knew how the guest list was chosen. It seemed arbitrary, a mix of high nobility, wealthy merchants, influential artists, and even a few respected academics. Lily, of course, did not receive one at the castle. But one was delivered to Edward. He had no intention of going. It seemed frivolous, a distraction from the weighty matters of a border dispute with the mountain clans. But then he saw the way the women of the court spoke of it, their eyes bright with anticipation. He saw the genuine excitement, the hunger for something new, something that spoke to them. He realized this was not just a fashion show. It was a significant cultural event happening in the heart of his kingdom. And he, the king, was utterly ignorant of its creator. A sense of disconnection washed over him. He felt like a stranger in his own city. On the night of the show, he changed his mind. He told his guards he was retiring early, then donned a simple, dark cloak with a deep hood. He slipped out of the castle, not as a king, but as an anonymous observer. He wanted to see this phenomenon for himself, to understand the source of all this excitement without the filter of his royal station. The venue was an old, decommissioned mint, its high, vaulted ceilings and stark stone walls scrubbed clean. Simple wooden benches were arranged on either side of a raised runway, and the space was lit by hundreds of bare, glowing lanterns that cast a warm, dramatic light. The air was electric with anticipation. Edward found a place to stand in the deep shadows behind the last row of benches, his hood pulled low. He felt a strange thrill, the frisson of being an unseen observer. The show began. There was no herald, no grand pronouncements. The lanterns simply dimmed, and a single, haunting melody from a lone cello filled the cavernous space. Then, the first model walked out. Edward caught his breath. It was unlike anything he had seen at court. The garment was a coat of some heavy, dark gray material, cut with the sharp precision of a military uniform. But it was unadorned, its beauty lying entirely in its structure, the way it moved with the woman wearing it. It was powerful, austere, and achingly beautiful. One by one they came. A dress of pale, raw silk that seemed to float, untethered to the body beneath. Trousers, sharply tailored and worn with a soft, flowing tunic, a radical departure for the women of his court. A gown the color of burnt orange, its fabric gathered in 1,000 tiny, intricate pleats. Each piece was a revelation. This was not clothing. This was armor. This was art. This was a statement. Valerius was right. The women wearing these clothes looked transformed. They looked strong, graceful, and utterly, unapologetically themselves. He understood then what Lily had been trying to tell him. He saw the vision, the artistry, the sheer, breathtaking intelligence behind the designs. This was not a hobby. This was the work of a master, a genius. The shame he had felt before returned, sharp and acidic in his throat. Cute little hobbies. The words echoed in his memory, a testament to his own profound blindness. The final piece was a triumph. A gown of the deepest crimson velvet, so rich it seemed to drink the light. It was starkly simple from the front, a column of pure color that clung to the model's form. But as she turned, the audience gasped. The back was a masterpiece of embroidery, a phoenix, its wings wrought in thread of gold and bronze and flame, rising from a nest of silver ashes. It was a symbol of rebirth, of beauty born from destruction. The audience rose to its feet, the applause deafening. echoing off the stone walls. The models came out for a final walk, a procession of strength and beauty. And then, after they had cleared the stage, a single figure walked out from the wings into the pool of light. It was Lily. She was not wearing a grand gown, but a simple, perfectly tailored black tunic and trousers of her own design. Her hair was pulled back from her face. Her expression was not smiling, but serene, confident, and full of a quiet, unshakable power. She walked to the center of the runway, looked out at the sea of faces, and gave a small, graceful bow. The applause became a roar. In the shadows, Edward felt the world tilt on its axis. The air rushed from his lungs. It was as if he had been struck by lightning. Lily. His Lily. She was Aurelia. All the pieces fell into place with a sickening crash. Her weariness, her late nights, her strange new distance, the closed sketchbook. It was all there, a story of her secret labor, her silent defiance, her brilliant triumph. And he had been utterly, completely blind to it. He had been so wrapped up in his own world, his own kingdom, that he had failed to see the one she was building right under his nose. A queendom of her own making, forged not with a crown and a scepter, but with a needle and thread. He watched her, radiant and powerful under the lights, celebrated by the most influential people in his city. She was magnificent, and she had done it all without him. Not just without his help, but in spite of his dismissal. The realization was a physical blow. He saw the chasm that had opened between them, not as a simple distance, but as a vast canyon carved out by his own ignorance, his own careless words. He had not just failed to support her, he had actively wounded her. And she had taken that wound and spun it into gold. He stumbled back, away from the light, melting deeper into the shadows. His first instinct, the instinct of a king, was to fix it, to command, to provide, to overwhelm the problem with a force of his resources. He could give her a royal charter. He could build her the grandest atelier the world had ever seen, with 100 seamstresses and access to the imperial treasuries. He could shower her with wealth and prestige, wrap her success in the banner of his own royal patronage. And as the thought formed, he recognized it for the poison it was. That was the same arrogance, the same blindness that had caused this rift in the first place. It was the belief that her dream was a small thing he could magnify, a trinket he could place in a more expensive box. To do so now would be to misunderstand all over again. It would be an attempt to absorb her queendom back into his kingdom, to make her success an extension of his own power. It would be another, grander dismissal. He slipped out of the old mint before the crowds began to disperse, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He didn't want her to see him, not like this, not as the king lurking in the shadows of her triumph. He walked the city streets for hours, the cool night air doing nothing to quell the fire of his shame. He saw his kingdom with new eyes. He saw the women in their fine, stuffy court gowns, and he saw the future in the confident stride of the Baroness in her Aurelia coat. He had been presiding over a kingdom on the verge of a cultural shift, and he hadn't even noticed. Lily had not just been making dresses. she had been giving voice to a silent, collective yearning for change. By the time the first gray light of dawn touched the spires of the castle, he knew what he had to do. It was the only thing he could do. It was not an act of power, but an act of surrender. The next afternoon, a royal page, dressed in simple livery, entered the Aurelia atelier. The shop was quiet, the remnants of the previous night's success visible in the stray threads on the floor and the empty bolts of fabric leaning against a wall. Alara was at the counter, carefully folding a length of silk. "Good day," the page said, his voice hushed with a kind of reverence for the space. "I am here to book an appointment for a new client, for a fitting, a gentleman's suit." Alara raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Aurelia designs for women." "The client is aware," the page said smoothly. "He is a great admirer of the designer's structural technique and believes her vision could be applied to men's tailoring. He is prepared to pay double the usual commission for the consideration." Alara paused. She looked toward the back room, where Lily was sketching furiously, a torrent of new ideas unleashed by the show. "What is the name?" she asked. The page hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Mr. E. Windsor." Lily agreed. The challenge intrigued her. She had never designed for a man, but the principles of structure, form, and movement were universal. And the fee would be enough to secure the lease on the shop for another year, and purchase a new loom she had her eye on. She was a businesswoman now, and this was a sound business decision. She told Alara to book the appointment for the following afternoon. She felt no particular curiosity about the client. He was simply a name in a ledger. The next day, just as the afternoon sun was slanting through the large north-facing window, the bell above the door chimed. Lily came out from the back room, a tape measure draped around her neck, a piece of chalk tucked behind her ear. And there, standing in the middle of her shop, was Edward. He was not dressed as a king. He wore simple, well-made traveler's clothes, dark trousers, a linen shirt, and leather boots. There was no crown, no guards, no ceremony. He just stood there, hands held loosely at his sides, looking entirely out of place, and yet completely, achingly present. The world seemed to stop. The quiet hum of the city outside faded away. It was just the two of them, surrounded by the physical evidence of her secret life. He looked at the bolts of fabric, the dress forms draped in half-finished creations, the sketches pinned to the walls. He was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. His eyes, when they finally met hers, were filled with a universe of regret. Lily's first instinct was to harden herself, to retreat behind the cool professional persona of Aurelia. But she couldn't. This was Edward, and the look on his face was not one of a king demanding an audience, but of a man who was utterly, hopelessly lost. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy with all the things that had gone unsaid for months. It was he who finally broke it. "Lily," he began, his voice rough. He cleared his throat. "I believe I have an appointment. For a suit." She stared at him, her mind struggling to reconcile the king of the elven realms with the man standing before her, asking to be her client. She simply nodded, her throat too tight for words. She gestured toward a small raised platform in the corner. "Please." He walked over and stood on the platform, his posture stiff, uncertain. The dynamic was completely inverted. Here, in this room, she was the one with the authority, This was her domain. He was the supplicant. She picked up her notebook and a piece of chalk, her movements slow and deliberate. She needed the comfort of the familiar ritual. "What did you have in mind?" she asked, her voice cool, professional. "Whatever you think is best," he said quietly. "I trust the designer." The words were a quiet offering, a plea. She took a steadying breath and approached him. She began to take his measurements, the familiar process grounding her. The width of his shoulders, the length of his arm, the circumference of his chest. The tape measure was a thin, fragile line between them. She worked in silence, her touch impersonal, efficient. But it was impossible to ignore the warmth of him, the faint scent of cedar and parchment that was uniquely his. It was impossible to ignore the way his breath hitched when her fingers brushed against his neck. He stood perfectly still, a statue submitting to her will. He was letting her lead, letting her be in control. It was a gesture so contrary to his nature, so profound in its humility, that it began to chip away at the wall she had built around her heart. When she was finished, she stepped back, her notebook filled with numbers. Still, he didn't speak. He just watched her, his heart in his eyes. "Why are you here, Edward?" she finally asked, the question soft but direct. "I saw the show," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I was there, in the back. Lily, it was magnificent. You were magnificent." She said nothing, just held his gaze. "I came here," he continued, his voice cracking with an emotion he could no longer contain, "to apologize. And I knew that words spoken in the castle would be meaningless. They would be the words of a king, and the man who needs to apologize is not a king. He is just a fool, a blind, arrogant fool." He took a step off the platform, closing the small distance between them. "When you showed me your sketches, your dreams, I didn't see them. I didn't see you. I saw a pastime, a diversion. I diminished you. I diminished your art. And in doing so, I broke something between us, something precious." Tears were shimmering in his eyes, unshed. He made no move to hide them. "That night, watching you on that stage, I finally understood. You don't need a king. You don't need my permission or my resources or my crown. You built this entire world with your own two hands, in silence, while I remained completely oblivious. You built a queendom, Lily, and it is more beautiful than any kingdom I have ever known." He reached out, not to touch her, but as if to show his hands were empty. "I don't want to save you. I don't want to give you a bigger studio or make you the royal designer. That would be the same mistake all over again. I am here to ask if you would let me support you, not as a king bestowing favor, but as a partner, as the man who loves you and is in awe of what you have created. I want to learn your world. I want to see it through your eyes, if you will let me." His raw vulnerability was more powerful than any royal decree. He was stripping himself of his crown, his title, his power, and offering her only the truth of his heart. She saw the genuine respect in his gaze, the profound shame, the desperate, hoping love. The ice in her throat, the frozen lump of unshed tears that had been there for months, finally began to melt. A single, hot tear traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "When I was a girl," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "my grandmother taught me to sew. She said the strength of a garment isn't in the fabric, but in the stitches. A weak stitch will always pull, and eventually the whole thing will unravel, no matter how beautiful the cloth. She looked at him, her eyes clear and searching. Our stitches were weak, Edward. Then let me learn to sew, he said, his voice raw with sincerity. Let me help you mend it. I will hold the pins. I will sweep the floors. I will do whatever you need. Just let me be a part of your world again. She looked around her shop, at the light streaming through the window, at the beautiful chaos of creation. This was her sanctuary, the place she had built from her own pain and determination. It was strong enough, she realizing, to let him in. He was not a threat to it. He was just a man, humbled and hoping. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. All right, Edward, she said softly. All right. The relief that washed over his face was so immense it was almost painful to watch. He didn't rush to embrace her. He simply stood there, letting the moment settle. A silent agreement passing between them. A new beginning. The dynamic of their world shifted on its axis that day. In the grand halls of the castle, in the throne room with its heavy tapestries and gilded ceilings, he was King Edward, and she was his brilliant, celebrated partner. She advised him, not just on matters of state, but on culture, on art, on the quiet, powerful currents that truly shaped the kingdom. She wore her own designs, each one a statement of her independence and vision, and the court followed her lead. The stuffy, restrictive fashions of the past gave way to a new era of elegance and strength. But the throne room was not the center of their universe. The true center was the little shop in the artisans' quarter, which soon expanded into the building next door, and then the one after that. The Aurelia Atelier became a landmark, a hub of creativity and innovation. And in that world, he was not the king. On many afternoons, after his royal duties were done, he would come to the studio. He learned the difference between silk charmeuse and silk chiffon. He learned how to thread a needle, how to press a seam flat. He was clumsy at first, his large hands unused to such delicate work, but he was a patient and determined student. More often than not, he was simply there. He would sit in a chair in the corner of Lily's private design studio, reading over trade reports while she sketched, the quiet scratch of her charcoal a counterpoint to the rustle of his papers. He would make them tea. He would listen as she talked through a complex structural problem with a new design. His favorite task, the one he claimed with a quiet sense of purpose, was holding the pincushion. While Lily draped fabric over a dress form, her mind a universe away as she coaxed the cloth into new and beautiful shapes, he would stand beside her, holding the small, tomato-shaped cushion. He would watch her work, his expression one of profound admiration and contentment. He would hand her a pin when she reached for one, his movements sure and practiced. One evening, as the last of the light faded from the sky, Valerius, his old advisor, came to the studio to fetch him for an urgent matter. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. The studio was a warm, cluttered haven of creativity. Lily stood on a small stool, adjusting the shoulder of a half-finished gown on a mannequin, her face alight with concentration. And there, at the foot of the stool, was the king of the elven realms, his crown left behind in another world, patiently holding a red pincushion, his eyes fixed on her with an expression of absolute devotion. He was not a king saving a damsel or a patron funding an artist. He was simply a man, happy to hold the pins, content to exist in the orbit of her light, a willing and humble subject in the queendom she had built, all on her own.